Ethan Riley was born in the quiet, unassuming expanse of a small town in the Midwest, where life unfurled with predictable rhythms. Factory whistles at 6 a.m., shifts, modest dinners at home, a cycle repeated for generations. His parents, salt-of-the-earth working-class folks, toiled tirelessly, their quiet hopes for a better future for their son a flickering ember in their weary eyes. But Ethan wasn't content with just better. He harbored a fervent, almost consuming desire for something extraordinary. His childhood room, little more than a cramped den with a single window overlooking a dusty field, became his first command center. There, hunched over an old clunky computer his father had salvaged from an office clearout, he plunged into a world beyond their sleepy town. The internet, slow and dial-up, was his portal to stories of visionary entrepreneurs like Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, and Elon Musk. Each biography devoured, each anecdote absorbed, stoked the fire within him. His school years were an unusual blend, academically sharp, especially in math and computer science, and a budding, relentless entrepreneur. He'd buy bulk candy from a wholesaler hours away and resell it to classmates at a markup. He designed simple yet functional websites for local mom-and-pop shops, selling everything from fishing tackle to floral arrangements. And he'd fix every glitchy computer in the neighborhood for a modest fee. Every dollar earned, every penny saved, went into his piggy bank. Every setback, and there were many, like his ill-fated attempt to launch a line of designer t-shirts that flopped spectacularly, was meticulously analyzed, transforming into a valuable lesson. He never saw himself as inherently gifted or a genius, but he was driven by an unwavering persistence and discipline. After high school, he easily gained admission to a top state university in New York, majoring in software engineering. New York City, with its pulsating energy, dizzying array of opportunities and cutthroat competition, embraced him. His college years were a constant grind, studying, working odd jobs, and coding late into the nights. His big idea, an application to optimize logistics for small and medium-sized businesses, felt like pure genius. It promised to slash delivery costs, streamline inventory tracking, and make small businesses operate with unprecedented efficiency. Many smiled politely, patronizingly even, as he passionately pitched his logistics revolution, but Ethan refused to yield. For months, he pounded the pavement, knocking on the doors of venture capital firms, enduring countless polite but firm rejections. Too risky. Untested market, you're too green, were the common refrains. Some days, he subsisted solely on instant ramen, and his office was a cramped, dingy room in an old Brooklyn walk-up smelling of stale coffee and desperate ambition. He'd sleep only 3 or 4 hours a night, consumed by his vision, refusing to allow himself to relax. The only beacon of light in this daily marathon was his girlfriend and later wife, Sarah. She was his high school sweetheart, the only one who truly believed in his dream, even when Ethan himself wrestled with doubt. She was his rock, his quiet harbor in the tempestuous seas of startup life. Her unwavering faith in him was an invaluable fuel.
3 years later, just as hope began to wane, Ethan miraculously found an investor. It was an old-school shark of the industry, a seasoned magnate named Robert Sterling, who had long since retired but saw a flicker of his younger self in the exhausted, driven young man. The seed money he received was modest, barely enough for a small office rental and salaries for his first 3 employees. But it was enough to refine his product, perfect the code, and finally launch it into the market. The company, which he proudly named Viridian Logistics, began to gain traction. Slowly at first, then rapidly. Their software proved to be not just useful, but revolutionary. It enabled small and medium-sized enterprises to slash their logistics costs by 30 to 40%, an unheard-of figure. Reviews poured in, overwhelmingly positive, and demand grew exponentially. The office phone rang incessantly. Ethan quickly expanded his team, hiring the best and brightest, those who shared his vision, not just those looking for a paycheck. Even as CEO, he continued to work shoulder to shoulder with his team, diving into every detail, troubleshooting every problem. He was a true leader, driving his vision forward. Within 5 years, Viridian Logistics had transformed into a veritable business empire. It wasn't just a successful company. It was a dominant force in its niche, setting industry trends. Ethan Riley became the face of entrepreneurial success. His name graced the covers of business magazines, and he was a sought-after speaker at prestigious conferences and international forums, held up as the epitome of the self-made millionaire. He owned a sprawling penthouse in Manhattan, a fleet of luxury cars, and a private jet for his global business trips. His life was steeped in the kind of opulence he had only dreamed of as a boy in his cramped Midwestern room. His former tiny room had morphed into a sprawling executive office on the top floors of a prestigious Manhattan skyscraper, offering panoramic views of the entire city. Instead of college friends who had long since drifted away, he was surrounded by influential business tycoons, powerful politicians, and glittering celebrities. His parties were social events, meticulously documented in glossy gossip magazines. He was on top of the world, and it felt as though it would last forever. The intoxicating sense of invincibility began to consume him. He started distancing himself from ordinary people, from those who had stood by him in the beginning. He began to believe he was special, that he was beyond reproach, that he could control everything. Sarah, his wife, remained by his side, though she felt increasingly lost in this dazzling, unfamiliar world. She still cherished simplicity and genuine connection, but their lives had become a relentless carousel of social galas, high-stakes business dinners, and superficial charity events. She tried to talk to Ethan about it, about their growing distance, about the fact that their children, his son Jake and daughter Chloe, barely saw him. But Ethan would wave her off. "We're building a better future for them, Sarah. They'll be proud." He loved them immensely, but he simply didn't have the time. He rationalized that he was providing for their happiness, oblivious to how he was losing their true connection.
It was then, at the zenith of his triumph, when Ethan's judgment was clouded by success and overconfidence, that Victor Stone appeared. Stone was the embodiment of everything Ethan now associated with New Age business success: charismatic, ruthlessly ambitious, with grandiose ideas and impeccable style. Victor headed a massive international investment fund that expressed interest in Viridian Logistics. Stone proposed to Ethan a global expansion, promising colossal investments and even greater returns. "We'll take Viridian Logistics public. We'll be a global powerhouse." His words were music to Ethan's ears. Blinded by the grand prospects and Victor's irresistible charisma, Ethan failed to notice the blaring red flags. He dismissed the cautious warnings from his CFO, Martha Jenkins, an older, meticulously detailed, and highly experienced woman who had been with the company since its early days. She pointed out unusual clauses in contracts, overly risky investments in dubious projects in far-off countries, and strange shell corporations that suddenly appeared among their partners. "Ethan, these farms are just fronts," Martha would quietly but persistently warn. "Money is vanishing into thin air." But Ethan trusted Victor, convinced he was a kindred spirit, just as hungry for success as he was, merely more flexible in his financial maneuvers. "We'll build an empire, Ethan, a true empire," Victor would exclaim, clapping him on the back during lavish dinners at the city's most exclusive restaurants, where vintage wine flowed endlessly. "The world awaits us, and those who aren't with us are against us." Ethan believed him. He was so captivated by the idea of global expansion, so consumed by his own grandiose vision, that he failed to see how his own company, his brainchild, was becoming nothing more than a tool in someone else's dirty game. He was at the peak, but it was a peak from which a dangerous descent had already begun. Cracks in his empire were barely visible, concealed by the glitter of wealth, the roar of applause, and the facade of false smiles. Victor Stone, it turned out, wasn't just a shrewd business shark with a keen sense for profit. He was a master manipulator and a fraudster of the highest caliber.
He'd expertly disguised himself as a benevolent partner, seemingly sharing Ethan's ambitions. But his true plan was brutally simple. Inflate the value of Viridian Logistics to astronomical, unrealistic heights through complex schemes of fictitious contracts and dubious investments. Siphon off the maximum amount of cash to shell corporations, and then abandon Ethan with crushing debt and the shattered remains of a once thriving company.
The first blaring red flags didn't come from aggressive investors or a rival's whispers, but from within Ethan's own trusted circle. Martha Jenkins, his chief financial officer, an older, meticulously detailed, and incredibly experienced woman who had dedicated her best years to the company, would regularly bring stacks of papers to Ethan's sprawling desk, desperately trying to get through to him. "Ethan, I don't understand these accounts," she'd insist, her voice tight with concern, pointing to multi-million-dollar transactions flowing from offshore accounts. "There are no supporting documents, no proof of work completed. This isn't traceable, it's not clean. Money is vanishing into thin air." But Ethan, blinded by Victor's promises of global domination and untold riches, would dismiss her with a condescending wave. "Martha, this is big business, international partners. Things are done differently at this level. We can't scrutinize every single penny. It's about trust, not endless paperwork." He felt himself above such petty details, confident in his ability to see the bigger picture. Victor expertly reinforced his overconfidence, dangling new, grandiose projects that demanded massive capital injections. "We're acquiring a stake in this Asian tech firm, Ethan. It's our gateway to the Pacific Rim market. Billions of dollars in potential profit. Just imagine." Ethan almost robotically signed document after document, sinking deeper into a financial quicksand. He took out colossal loans, leveraging every asset the company owned, including real estate, even his personal properties. "All for expansion," Victor would declare. "A little risk for limitless opportunities."
The development team, once brimming with innovative ideas, began to notice that the new projects, despite receiving colossal funding, had no practical application. They were dead projects, mere simulations of intense activity. Long-term, reliable employees, sensing something was gravely wrong, quietly started resigning. Ethan either didn't notice or chose to ignore it, replacing them with eager, less experienced new hires who were easily swayed by the company's dazzling facade. Then, as often happens in such meticulously planned downfalls, a global market downturn suddenly hit. A crisis, of course, engineered behind the scenes. The stock price of Viridian Logistics plummeted in a matter of days. Banks, as if on cue, demanded immediate repayment of loans. Investors, many of them Victor's own proxies, panicked and dumped their shares, triggering a devastating chain reaction. Panic escalated, uncontrollable and swift. One morning, Ethan arrived at the office. Instead of the usual buzz of a thriving company, he was met with a chilling, oppressive silence. He walked into his executive suite and found Victor Stone sitting calmly at his desk, as immovable as a rock amidst a storm, his face devoid of emotion.
"Ethan, we have a problem," Victor stated flatly, barely looking up from some papers. "The company is on the verge of bankruptcy. The financial indicators are abysmal. I'm forced to withdraw my investments. My investors need their capital, and we can't risk any more." A cold dread washed over Ethan. He hadn't yet grasped the full scale of the catastrophe, but he already felt the icy touch of betrayal, like a knife plunging into his back. "How can this be? But you promised. We're partners. We were building an empire." Ethan's voice trembled, betraying the rising panic within him. Victor merely shrugged, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. "Business, Ethan, nothing personal. You signed all the documents yourself." He stood, picked up his briefcase, and without another word or a glance back, he walked out. The sound of the door closing echoed the finality of Ethan's undoing. The weeks that followed were an unimaginable hell on earth. Lawsuits, lawyers, debt collectors, investigators. Each day brought fresh, agonizing news. Viridian Logistics, his brainchild, his dream, his pride, was declared bankrupt.
The debts were colossal, far exceeding the company's assets. Ethan finally understood that all those millions, supposedly invested in growth, had simply vanished, funneled into Victor Stone's offshore accounts and those of his cronies. His name, once synonymous with success and innovation, now became a byword for fraud, bankruptcy, and public disgrace. Journalists camped outside his Manhattan penthouse, snapping photos, gleefully chronicling every humiliating detail of his downfall. He became an object of ridicule and contempt. He lost everything. First, the company, then his assets. Bank accounts were frozen, luxury cars sold for pennies on the dollar to cover a fraction of the debt. His sprawling penthouse, which he had once proudly shown off to friends, was foreclosed and put on auction. He moved into a tiny, dilapidated rented apartment on the city's outskirts, where the walls seemed to press in on him like grave slabs, and every murmur from his neighbors only amplified his agonizing solitude.
But the most painful, the most unbearable loss was his personal life. Sarah, who had always been his anchor, his quiet harbor, simply couldn't endure the relentless pressure. The constant calls from creditors, the anonymous threats, the paparazzi lurking outside their building, the suffocating atmosphere at home. All of it slowly, relentlessly broke her spirit. "Ethan, I can't do this anymore," she said quietly one evening, her voice barely a whisper. Her eyes filled with tears, but also a strange, chilling resolve. "I'm exhausted. I can't live in constant fear under constant scrutiny. The kids, they shouldn't have to watch their father destroy himself. They deserve a peaceful life." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "We need to get a divorce. For their sake. It's the best thing for them." Her words felt like a death sentence. The divorce was filed quickly and quietly, with little emotion from Sarah, who seemed to have already emptied herself of all feeling. She took the children and moved in with her parents in another state, desperately trying to shield them from the storm that had consumed Ethan. He was left utterly alone. His phone remained silent. Former friends who had toasted him with expensive champagne and sworn eternal loyalty now crossed the street to avoid him, fearing that the shadow of his failures would taint them too. He became an outcast, a man who had lost everything and everyone. The days blurred into an endless gray continuum. Ethan would sleep until noon, then lie in bed for hours staring at the ceiling, utterly lost, unable to find the strength even to get up. He tried to find work, but his name was a black mark in the business world. Former partners refused his calls. Former rivals openly mocked him behind his back. He felt worthless, destitute, crushed. His salvation, or rather the illusion of it, became alcohol. A cheap bottle of whiskey became his sole companion. He drank to forget, to dull the unbearable pain, the burning shame, the boundless despair. He drank to feel nothing. The mirror reflected a stranger, a swollen face, red, bewildered eyes, a beard that hadn't seen a razor in weeks, a man aged 10 years overnight, in whom the former successful magnate was barely recognizable. His body ached, his mind was clouded, and his soul was shattered into a million pieces. One morning, he woke up on the cold floor of his tiny apartment. His head throbbed with pain, his mouth tasted foul. On the table lay an unopened bottle of whiskey he'd bought the day before, but he'd evidently lacked the strength to reach it. In the pocket of his old jeans, which he hadn't changed in days, he found a crumpled photograph. It was Jake and Chloe, smiling, happy, hugging him tightly. Their eyes full of childlike love and trust looked up at him. In that moment, a sudden, agonizing realization hit him. He couldn't end this way. He couldn't allow himself to sink to the absolute bottom, to become utterly worthless. He had to fight. If only for them, for those two small lives who once called him Dad. This memory of his children became his first glimmer of light piercing through the oppressive darkness. It was the rock bottom from which he decided to push back. Despite all the pain, shame, and despair, a tiny flicker of hope rekindled within his soul. The sharp morning after his cold floor revelation wasn't the start of a new life for Ethan, but merely a painful 0 point. The feeling that he couldn't end things this way, that something had to change, wrestled with a terrible hangover and a deep, pervasive apathy. He felt like a shattered pot broken into a million pieces, which someone was trying to glue back together, but the fragments refused to hold, slipping from his hands, scratching. The first step was the hardest, almost impossible. He got up, his trembling hands reached for the leftover whiskey bottle, and taking a deep breath, he poured its contents down the sink. The alcohol gurgled as it disappeared into the drain pipes, as if the last remnants of his former life were washing away. His hands shook so much he could barely stand, but he did it. It was a small but significant victory over himself, the first brick in the foundation of his new self.
Next came the harsh reality. He had to survive. He started looking for work, but it proved to be significantly harder than in his worst nightmares. His name, Ethan Riley, once so well known and respected, was now a black mark in all serious business circles. Former partners, who just yesterday invited him to elite golf tournaments, now didn't return his calls. The doors of business centers, where he was once a welcome guest, now slammed shut in his face. He sent hundreds of resumes, made calls, pounded on doors, to no avail. No one wanted to be associated with Riley the bankrupt. Each rejection was another blow to his already trampled self-esteem. Finally, complete despair forced him to turn to the local employment center. There, after long waits and humiliating questions, he was offered a position as a loader at a local grocery warehouse. Hard, exhausting physical labor, dozens of kilograms of goods to carry, sort, and load every day. Blisters on his hands that burst to bleed, unbearable pain in his back and muscles, which he had long grown accustomed to. But it was work. It was real money, though meager, barely enough to cover his small apartment rent and the simplest food. Every day, after an exhausting shift, he returned to his small, gray apartment, utterly fatigued, but with a strange, unusual sense of satisfaction. He was earning his bread honestly with his sweat and calluses. He no longer drank, not because he was too busy, but because physical exhaustion and the need to survive had pushed out any desire to escape reality. His body ached, but his mind was gradually clearing. At the warehouse, Ethan met Nicholas, an older, slightly tanned man who worked as a forklift driver. Nicholas was calm and wise, never intrusive with advice, but always listened attentively when Ethan, during short breaks, involuntarily began to talk about his inner torment. Nicholas didn't know Ethan's past, hadn't read about his bankruptcy in the newspapers. He only saw him as the new, quiet loader who diligently performed his job. One evening after work, Nicholas invited Ethan for a cup of tea at his humble but cozy home, which smelled of pies and peace. There, for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt warmth, sincerity, and some special, earthy wisdom. Nicholas didn't ask about his past, but told stories about his own life, about the difficulties he endured, how he survived after a crop failure, how his family rallied after a fire destroyed their home.
Life, son, it's like a river. There are rapids and waterfalls. The main thing is not to lose yourself along the way. Nicholas quietly said, sipping his tea. Money comes and goes, but what you have inside you, character, humanity, the desire to live, that's the most valuable thing. These conversations, these simple yet profound encounters with Nicholas, became the beginning of Ethan's reevaluation of values. Ethan realized that while building his empire, he had lost himself. He chased after glamour, status, and others' praise, ignoring true relationships, forgetting about humanity. He saw how money changed people, how it divided, how it pushed them to betrayal. but he also saw that true happiness couldn't be bought with any fortune. It was in the smile of his children, in Sarah's support, in a sincere conversation with Nicholas, in his own clear conscience. Ethan started reading. Now, these weren't business books about success and financial strategies, but philosophy, psychology, history, classical literature. He delved into the works of Marcus Aurelius, Francis Bacon, reading about the fates of great people who experienced ups and downs. He analyzed his mistakes. The main one was blind trust and excessive, destructive self-confidence. He believed he could control everything and ignored warnings. He realized that true success isn't just about financial indicators, but also about honesty, responsibility, and the ability to admit and learn from one's mistakes. One day, while unloading another batch of spoiled fruits, Ethan noticed how much produce was being written off due to improper storage, incorrect packaging, or logistical delays. His engineering brain, which had been dormant for years under the weight of millions, suddenly reawakened. He began to analyze warehouse processes, look for bottlenecks, and think about how to optimize operations. This was a different kind of thinking, not about multi-million-dollar deals and global markets, but about saving every kilogram of goods, about the efficiency of simple, everyday processes. He developed several simple but brilliant ideas for improving packaging, optimizing forklift routes, and organizing warehouse space. He presented his ideas to the warehouse management. At first, they looked at him with suspicion, as if to say, "A loader teaching us how to run a warehouse." But his proposals were so logical and the potential savings so obvious that they decided to implement them.
His successes at the warehouse were insignificant compared to his former millions, but for him, they were a whole world. He felt that he was creating something valuable again, that he was useful. This work helped him restore faith in himself, but no longer as a genius magnet, but as a skilled specialist who could be useful to society. 2 years later, physically and morally strengthened, Ethan ventured into a new beginning. He took a small loan from a bank. Surprisingly, they believed in him, as his name was no longer so toxic, and his stable job as a loader and modest credit history were impeccable. Instead of ambitious Synergy Tech 2.0 with offices and skyscrapers, he founded a humble consulting enterprise. He named it Logistics Rebirth. The specialization was the same, logistics optimization, but this time for small and medium-sized businesses, with a special emphasis on socially responsible business, ecological solutions, and honesty. He didn't chase large clients, but offered his services to those who truly needed help: small farms, local producers, family-owned stores struggling to survive. Ethan refused any risky investments. His business was built on trust, honesty, and transparency. He personally met with each client, spending hours delving into their problems, offering individualized solutions that weren't always the cheapest, but always the most effective and ethical. He no longer pursued quick money. Every dollar earned was the result of his own hard work and his clients' trust. He valued every successful project, every sincere thank you. Gradually but steadily, his reputation began to recover. Word spread about that Ethan, who was once very rich and now helps small companies. People started reaching out to him not just for his expertise, but also because he was known for his integrity and principles. He hired people again, but this time he carefully selected those who shared his values: honesty, responsibility, empathy, and a desire to help. He no longer sought to build an empire. He sought to build a community where people trusted each other.
The biggest, most challenging hurdle remaining was his relationship with his children. He called Sarah regularly, but she was cautious and didn't want to traumatize the children if he disappeared again. Ethan understood this. He wrote letters to Jacob and Chloe, small, sincere, without pretense. He told them about his work, how he had changed, about his new lessons, and how much he loved and missed them. He didn't ask for a meeting, only wanted them to know that their father was fighting and not giving up. One day, 3 years after their separation, Sarah called him herself. Her voice was calm, but there was a newness to it. "Ethan, the children are asking about you. They want to see you. Chloe is asking if you still know how to tell stories about dragons." Ethan's breath caught. He didn't sleep all night before the meeting, more nervous than before any multi-million-dollar deal. When he saw them in the small, cozy cafe, grown but still so familiar, his Jacob and his Chloe, his heart ached with pain and inexpressible love. Jacob, who was already 15, remembered him as a successful, busy businessman and was initially distant, looking at him with distrust. Chloe, younger, looked with curiosity, recalling his gentle hugs. Ethan didn't try to make excuses, didn't promise them the moon. He simply told them the truth, his story of downfall and rebirth. He told them how much he loved them and how deeply he regretted all his mistakes, all the missed moments. He spoke about how he realized that the most important things in life aren't money, but relationships, trust, family. This conversation, sincere and candid, filled with awkward pauses and tears, became the beginning of the restoration of his most important relationships. Over time, they started seeing each other more often, and Ethan, though he didn't return to Sarah, was able to restore a full father-child relationship, becoming an example to his children of resilience, humanity, and the capacity for genuine repentance, not just success. Ethan Riley never again sought his former grandeur. His new company was successful, stable, but not a giant. He lived in comfort, but without excess, valuing every simple joy. His life was full of meaning. He regularly spoke at conferences, but not to boast, but to share his experience, warning others about the pitfalls of business and the importance of moral principles. He became not just a successful entrepreneur, but a wise, strong man who had gone through hell and emerged renewed, having learned to value true things, honesty, humanity, family, and inner peace. He was a phoenix who burned in the fire of failures, but rose from the ashes, stronger and wiser than ever, ready to help others find their way.